so we have great concern for our families, for our friends, people who don't give any indication of having a relationship with Christ, because they're very much in danger of being left behind. And of course, left behind means you got to experience the tribulation if you survive it. And as we've seen during these series of sevens in the tribulation, there are lots of folks left behind that don't survive it. So what a great risk that you're up against if you want to, say, well, there is no such thing as salvation except through Christ. Well, then you run the risk of being left behind. And then, you say, well, will I have a chance after to give my heart to Christ? Well, you're going to have a chance if you make it, if you survive, because there's a great revival in the tribulation. But there are lots of folks that don't survive the initial chaos, and there are lots of folks that don't survive all of the turmoil that goes on in the midst of the 7 years. So now then, after that, the Battle of Armageddon has been fought. That was chapter 19. The earthly millennial reign of Christ has ended. That was in chapter 20. And the great white throne judgment, again in chapter 20, where God has sentenced Satan and all the ungodly to eternal hell. All of that's over with now. And now then is the climax of what John is really wanting to say. Now remember, Jesus told John in the beginning, write down what you see. And so we're fortunate, we've got it. But can you imagine the emotion of John the apostle? Even though he's exiled, even though he's separated from family and church and so forth, imagine his excitement, his ecstasy now when he gets to see what he describes here in verse 20, in chapter 21, as a new heaven and a new earth. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Now, there's so much here in this chapter. We're going to divide it into two parts. We're going to do part 1 tonight, we'll do part 2 next week. And part 1, we're going to look tonight at the relationships that will exist in heaven. And then there is one verse, verse 8, that sort of is a segue that describes those who are excluded, those who won't be there. So we're going to look at that tonight. Then next week we'll do part 2, which will describe the dimensions of heaven. What does it look like? What will it look like? And so we'll look forward to that next week. So John, and what I'm going to do tonight, most of the time I'll give you, we'll read the entire passage or a good portion of the passage, then we'll come back and give commentary and comment on it. But tonight, I thought we'd just work through it line by line, and sometime word by word. Let's just sort of work our way through it. So verse 1 literally is divided into 3 parts. John said, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The Greek word is kairos, which literally means a new kind. It is something that's never been seen before, never been used before. So John is not seeing heaven as we know it today remade. No, this is a new heaven. He's not seeing the earth as it exists today, as it has been renovated and remade. No, this is a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. All right, now let's pause here, man. Let's talk about this, because we got a lot of clues in the Bible about heaven as it exists today. Where is it? What's it like? And then we've got a good commentary out of 2 Peter of what's going to happen with the earth. How is it going to be dissolved? So let's look at that. Now, what about this heaven today? We all know that when we die and we're separated, spirit from body separated, we go to be with the Lord. Well, where is that? You remember when Jesus was crucified between 2 thieves, and one of those thieves, one of those criminals, at the last moment believed that Jesus was the Christ. And you remember what Jesus said to him? Today you will be with me where? In paradise. All right? Paradise. So what is heaven? It's paradise. All right, you can imagine with your mind what that looks like. It's paradise. We also know that heaven is a real place. And I have that in your notes. And we're very familiar with that passage of John 14 when the disciples were discouraged because Jesus was leaving them, and he had already announced that. And they said, where are you going? And he told them, he said, where I'm going, you can't come with me now, but one day you will. But here's what he said to them. Remember, this is so important. He said, I am going away. They asked the question, why are you leaving us? He said, well, I'm going to prepare a place. It's the Greek word topos. We get our word topography from it, the study of places. Heaven's a real place, not a figment of somebody's imagination. I'm going to prepare a place for you. So heaven's a real place. We know that. Jesus said that. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 gave testimony of an individual who had an out-of-the-body afterlife experience. I happen to have known two people that have had one of these out-of-the-body experiences where they had a moment in time when they died, physically died, and their body, spirit began to separate from the body, and they got a glimpse of heaven. I wish I had time to tell you about both of those. They related it to me. They shared the testimony. Maybe you have known someone like that who shared it with you. There are plenty of people who've had that experience. I will tell you about my mother. When my mother was dying of cancer, we were with her up to the end, and my dad was giving primary care, and he was worn out. He was tired, so not knowing that it was the evening she would pass away. But I told my dad, you go in the other room and you rest and you take a nap. For several hours, I'm going to sit with Mother. And so I did. I sat with her. Well, she was kind of in and out of consciousness. They'd given her morphine because they knew there was no real hope of her recovery except from a miracle of God. And so they were making her comfortable, and she was kind of in and out of consciousness, and really even almost to the point of hallucination. And so I was sitting there with her, and all of a sudden, she looked over at me and gave me that look as if to say, what are you doing here? And so I said, well, Mom, I'm sitting here with you. Well, she said, you're not the only one here. And so then we began to have a conversation. She was not, I don't think at that point she was really hallucinating back and forth. She was seeing something. She was experiencing something. Now, in just a few hours, she would breathe her last breath. So I think she was seeing heaven and what was there. And she began to have conversations with people. The first person she had a conversation with was her father, my grandpappy. And she began to talk with him. And so I started talking to her. And I'd say, Mom, you see Pappy? Oh, yeah. I see him right here. I said, I'm hoping I can go see him soon. And then she started conversing with her good friend. She called him by name, back and forth. Well, about that time, my dad came in. He couldn't stay out too much longer. He came in and he said, what are you doing? Who are you talking to? I said, just be quiet a minute. Mom and I are having a conversation about heaven. And he said, oh, well, she's just out of her mind or something. I said, I want you to go back in that room where I sent you a while ago, and you take your nap or whatever you're doing. Mom and I are having a conversation about heaven. Well, he was frustrated. He went on out of the room. But for about an hour, we talked about it. She was in and out. But I guarantee you, I believe to my last breath, she was seeing glimpses of heaven, sort of an out-of-body experience, okay? So Paul talked about this guy, this person in 2 Corinthians who had this kind of experience. He called it the third heaven, and he used the word paradise, the same word Jesus used. Well, what else do we know about heaven? Well, we know it's up, right? We know it's high above the earth, according to Psalm 103, verse 11, and it's a place where the Lord looks down from, Psalm 14:2. Well, remember when Jesus, after appearing in his resurrected body for 40 days and nights, he finally ascended. In Acts chapter 1, he ascended up into heaven. Well, how can you ascend unless you're going up, right? And we know that according to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, we've talked about this many times in our study of Revelation. When Jesus comes back, he is descending. So what does all that mean? That's clues that heaven is up. It's a place where God the Father and God the Son reside. And it's a real place. Well, that's the heaven as it is today, as it exists. But John sees a new heaven that's coming. And he's going to describe that to us in just a moment. He's going to describe it to us. Well, what about this phrase, the first earth has passed away? What do we know about that? Well, I put in your notes the entire reference from 2 Peter chapter 3. I'm not going to read it to you. It's there for you to look at. But Peter talks about looking ahead at when the earth will be dissolved. He said the heavens will pass away with a loud noise, and the elements, that is the earthly elements, will be burned and dissolved. The Greek terminology there is going to be totally annihilated. And it's almost like it's going to be in a sort of an immediate disintegration. Well, Peter was looking ahead to that. But what was he looking ahead to? He was looking ahead to what John sees right here. The day when the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. All right. Now the second part of verse 1, what does John see? New heaven, new earth. What does he see? The sea, he says, was no more. Interesting phrase. The sea. Now remember where John is. He's been exiled onto an island called Patmos, about 40 miles offshore from modern-day Turkey, or from, in his day, what was Ephesus. That was his hometown. Most of us believe he was the pastor of the church at Ephesus. He was exiled there for preaching the gospel. So he was away from family, away from friends, away from homeland, away from a church family. He had been exiled there on Patmos. That's where he was when he received the apocalypse. So when he looked out from Patmos, he could just, now I've been to Patmos. If you ever go to the Holy Land, if you haven't been, you need to go. Before you die, you need to go to the Holy Land, if you can. And if you do go, be sure you put that little excursion to Patmos there, because it's real interesting to be out on that little small island of Patmos. Not many people live there, but to be there and to sort of look back, you can just barely see the shoreline. And so when John is exiled and he looks across the sea, what was that to him? The sea represented separation for him. Because he was out there, couldn't get over there. He could see it just in the horizon. But the sea for him was separation. And so now he says, no more sea. Wow. No more separation. All that represented separation to him was now non-existent. All of the painful, earthly separations no longer existed. I don't know about you, but I think that exhilarated John. To be able to say now a new heaven, a new earth, and the sea is no more. The first heaven's gone, the first earth is gone, and now there's no more sea, no more separation. Verse 2, he said, Now then I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared. An interesting Greek word there. Literally means made ready and now descending or now appearing. So what is this prepared place? It's the place Jesus talked about in John 14. Now John sees it. Now remember, John was present with the other disciples that night before he was crucified, and he's the one who recorded the words in his gospel that Jesus said about heaven. And now he sees it. He heard Jesus say it. I'm going away to prepare a place for you. And if I go away, I will come again and take you to be there with me, so that where I am, there you may be also. Now, John sees it. What he saw in his imagination, what he saw and had to believe by faith, now he sees it. And is prepared. Notice the terminology here in verse 2. Prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. That word adorned is cosmeo. We get our word cosmetic from it. Sort of a moment of awe. This bride made ready, prepared for her husband. I've said this to you before, and you gentlemen ought to be able to say what I'm going to say, the same kind of thing. You got a picture in your mind of what your bride looked like the first time you saw her as your bride. Now, you dated her, and you'd had a relationship with her, and maybe y'all were engaged for a period of time like Vicky and I were, and you were getting ready for the wedding. But listen, there is nothing like when you're standing in front of the church or the place where you got married, and you're looking at the back door, and when she steps in the door and you see her for the first time, made ready. Nothing like that picture. I've got that engraved in my mind. All right, so John says, now then, the bride has arrived. Who is the bride? We're the bride. The church is the bride of Christ. It's us. We're coming now. And then verse 3, he said, I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity. He will live with them, and they will be his peoples. God himself will be with them and be their God. Wow, what an awesome picture of ethnic and relational unity. Remember the Great Commission Jesus said? Go into all the world and make disciples and baptize them. Make disciples of all ethnos, all ethnicities. Now, John says, here they are. They're all in heaven. All the ethnicities are there. And verse 4, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Another interesting statement. You can almost see the mighty hand of God, as taking his thumbs and wiping away all the tears from our eyes. Wait a minute. There's tears in heaven? What in the world would we be crying about in heaven? Well, I'm not sure. But it would just seem like the things that cause us sadness and sorrow and pain and regret and all of that, we're going to still have that in our mind and heart, and God will have to wipe those tears away because there is no more of that. Nothing. Look at the end of verse 4. Death will be no more. What would cause us to be sad and sorrow and cry more than the death of a loved one? Death would be no more. Grief, dying, and pain no more. And even though we do grieve, we don't grieve like those without hope, but we do grieve, don't we? And here in heaven, the new heaven, there's none of that anymore. No broken hearts, no shattered lives. It's all gone because the previous things have passed away. Everything in this life. Think about it. Dysfunction, tragedy, disease, anything and everything that causes us to have hurt and pain and cry and grieve is gone. Wow. That's a new kind of place, wouldn't you say? Not anything like what we've experienced here. Nothing can compare to that. And then I'll let you read verses 5 through 7, the voice of the one seated on the throne, as he talks about what he's going to show John in chapter 22, the river of life, and those who will drink from it. But then there's this verse 8. It's sort of right in the middle of John's great vision of heaven. One last warning. A representative list describing not, individual sins necessarily, but lifestyles. Look at what he says. But the cowards. And I have there in your notes the Greek words and the meaning of the words. I hope you'll take some time after tonight and go back and look at the meaning of those words. The cowards, miserable people. The faithless. Pistos is the word for faith. Apistos is faithless. Those who have no faith. detestable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars. Their share will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. We've already talked about the second death. Those who are born again, those of us who are born again, only die once, but those who are not born again die twice. And this is just a reminder, just a warning of a representative list of people who live a life apart from God and what their eternal destiny is. And so I just have 4 closing thoughts for you. We'll mention those tonight and next week. Wow. Does this passage of Scripture, is there any more of an awesome text that magnifies the significance of having your name in the book of life? This is your destiny and my destiny right here. And this passage really speaks to us about the certainty of life after death. You know, there are a lot of people that don't believe in life after death. You know some of them. You have some of them in your friendships and your family. They don't believe in life after that. They believe when you die, that's it. It's all over. No. We who are Christians believe in life after death. And everybody experiences life after death. Not just those of us who are believers, but even unbelievers experience life after death. Here's a scripture passage that truly identifies the certainty of life after death. All the blessings and benefits of life on earth can never compare to the glory of heaven. Now, you and I can talk about some beautiful sights we've seen. And you, like me, if you've traveled and been places, you've seen some wonderful, beautiful things. You can't hardly even take a picture of it that even magnifies how beautiful it is and all the beauty that you experience in life. But nothing in this life compares to what it's going to be like here. And the last thing I would say about all of this is heaven is so much more than can ever be imagined. I mean, John's trying to give us a snapshot of it. But I'm just here to tell you, I just don't think we could ever completely and totally describe and define what heaven is going to be like. But that's where we're headed. That is our eternal destiny. So we'll pause tonight and do part 2 next week, where we look at what does heaven look like. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Thank you for those who've joined us via live stream. Have a good week, and I'll see you next Wednesday. I know y'all will worship together on Sunday.